Hi, I am Thanos, and in this chapter, I am going to show you how to calculate credit value adjustment or CVA, according to the Capital Requirements Regulation or CRR. First things first, let's have a look at the relevant regulatory framework. CRR, in Title 6 of Part 3, proposes three methods with regards the calculation of the own funds requirements for CVA risk. The advanced method as it described in Article 383, which refers to institutions that use internal models for specific risk of debt instruments. The standardized method as it described in Article 384, which refers to institutions that do not use internal models for specific risk of debt instruments. And an alternative to using CVA methods as it described in Article 385, where the own funds requirements for CVA risk are simply 10 times the RWAs for counterparty credit risk or CCR. With regards the regulatory updates from CRR1 to CRR2, there is no change in the standardized method. From CRR2 to CRR3, the advanced method is renamed as standardized method, with significant changes in the methodology. The standardized method is renamed as basic method also with changes. And the alternative option is renamed as simplified method remaining under the same concept. Today we are going to focus on how to implement the standardized method under CRR2, which is currently in force with an illustrative example, since the new methodology introduced in CRR3 is expected to be applied in January 2025. Our input data for traded instruments are comprising of 6 transactions and 2 counterparties. Transactions 1 and 2 refer to counterparty 1 and transactions 3, 4, 5 and 6 refer to counterparty 2. There is no netting agreement for transactions 1 and 2. Transactions 3 and 4 belong to the same netting agreement while transactions 5 and 6 to another netting agreement. The remaining maturity refers to years, and in column netting agreement it is shown whether the transaction is subject to a netting agreement or not. The exposure at default or EAD has already been calculated according to the CRR at an earlier stage. In step 1 of our process, we calculate the effective maturity, MI, per transaction. For single transactions without netting agreement, the effective maturity must be the maximum of 1 year and the remaining maturity of the transaction. On the other hand, for transactions subject to netting agreements, transactions 3, 4, and transactions 5, 6, must be the maximum of 1 year and the average notional weighted maturity according to Article 162, B2. By derogation from Article 162, the effective maturity shall not be capped at 5 years, but at the longest contractual remaining maturity in the netting set. To this end, we just use the weighted average maturity within each netting set, which is always less, or equal to the longest contractual maturity in the netting set. In step 2, we perform the calculations per counterparty. The EAD is simply the sum of the respective EADs, while the effective maturity is the weighted average. Then the discount factor is calculated based on the effective maturity. And the product of the three is shown in the last column. In the last column, we select the respective weight per counterparty according to Table 1 in case where there is an external credit assessment for the counterparty, or if there is no external credit assessment and the institution is using the IRB approach, we shall map our rating to one of the external credit assessments. If there is no external credit assessment and the institution is using the standardized approach, we shall assume 1% weight or 3% in case of a particular high-risk counterparty. Next, we have our input data for individual hedge instruments. We have 2 transactions refer to the same counterparty, one of our traded data, the notional amount, and the remaining maturity of the hedge instrument. In step 3, we perform calculations per transaction, calculating the discount factor and the product of the 3 amounts. In step 4, we perform calculations per counterparty, by simply adding together the results of the previous step. Next, we have our input data for index hedge. We have 2 transactions that also refer to the same counterparty, one of our traded data, the notional amount, the remaining maturity. and the weight applicable to each counterparty that is selected with the same approach as the weight explained earlier. However, in this case WIN shall be the weighted average of WI that are applicable to the individual constituents of the index. In step 5 we perform calculations per counterparty. Please note that these is a slight difference compared to steps 3 and 4 since step 3 is bypassed. We calculate the weighted notional amount in column WIN times BIND, the remaining maturity, the discount factor, and the product of 3. Finally, in step 6 we calculate the own funds requirements per counterparty, given that so far we have already pre-calculated all the relevant information per counterparty, and we just apply the respective formula that aggregates all the information together. If you enjoyed the video and helped you to answer your questions with regards the CVA standardized method, please like and subscribe my channel to be informed first in the future videos that are coming with more CRR issues explained.